met Richard on a summer night that felt borrowed from a dream. The air was heavy with honeysuckle and the kind of warm breeze that made even the most broken places feel whole for a moment. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves carelessly rolled, a whiskey-colored watch around his wrist, and a crooked smile that seemed carved from charm itself. I was at a friend's engagement party, a friend I no longer remember. But I remember Richard. He stood by the garden fence, swirling a glass of red wine like he belonged in a painting. When our eyes met, something moved behind his expression like recognition, or perhaps opportunity. I smiled. He smiled wider. He told me I looked like someone out of a novel. I told him I wrote them. That was the first lie, a small one, a safe one. I wasn't Claire yet, not officially, but she was forming a shell built of soft laughter, gentle glances, and the exact kind of vulnerability that made men like Richard feel powerful. Claire liked classic novels and always wore a ribbon in her hair. A red one. Men remember women with tokens like that. It makes them feel like they've discovered something rare. He said I reminded him of his first love. That was his first lie. I forgave it easily. The courtship was swift. Richard was a man who didn't like to wait. Within weeks, we were inseparable. He texted me in the morning, brought me coffee at lunch, called me every night until I fell asleep. Flowers, dinners, surprise getaways. He built a dream around me, and I let it rise brick by glittering brick. By our 5th month together, he told me he couldn't imagine life without me. I said I couldn't either. That was the second lie. This one was mine. We married the following autumn. It was a quiet wedding at a vineyard tucked into a foggy hillside. The leaves had turned, and the air smelled like fermenting apples and dying wood romantic in a way. I wore vintage lace and pinned the red ribbon into my curls. He said it was his favorite part of my look, that it made me seem timeless. He kissed me with such tenderness, I almost believed this could last. Almost. After the honeymoon, things changed not suddenly, but slowly, like rot creeping behind fresh wallpaper. He stopped looking at me the same way, stopped noticing when I changed my hair or put effort into dinner. His text came slower. His eyes drifted quicker. But I played my part. Claire, the devoted wife, never questioned, never accused, only smiled, only waited. Because underneath Claire, behind her patience and perfume, was something else, someone else. Someone who had seen men like Richard before. Someone who never forgot. He didn't know that the love story he thought he wrote was already over. And the real story? That had just begun. It started subtly, the way decay always does, not with a bang, but with a whisper. The first time I noticed it, I was folding laundry. One of his dress shirts, navy blue, tailored, the kind he wore to meetings where he felt important, had a faint, unfamiliar scent. Not mine, not our detergent. Something synthetic, floral, cheap, something younger. At first I blamed the dry cleaner. Then I opened the collar and found the smudge. Lipstick, a smear so faint it could have been mistaken for jam. But it wasn't the color I wore. I hadn't worn lipstick in weeks. Not since the Cold War between us began in that unspoken way couples do, sharing meals without words, making love without eye contact. He came home late that night blaming traffic. Lie. He kissed my cheek and asked if I wanted to watch a movie. Lie. He laughed when I said I was tired. Truth. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling fan turning above us like the slow-bladed arms of a clock. He snored beside me, content. I listened to the rhythm of his breath. He had no idea. No idea that I had begun to listen, to document, to remember. And I remembered everything. The next sign came in the form of a name Lexi popping up on his phone when he left it charging in the kitchen. A casual, "Thanks for last night," blinking across the screen like a knife in the dark. I did confront him. Not yet. Not ever, really. Confrontation is for people who don't already know the ending. Instead, I played the role. Claire, the perfect wife, made him coffee the next morning, wore his favorite dress, let him believe the mask was still in place. But something in me was shifting, something old, something buried. That night as he showered, I sat at his desk. His laptop wasn't password protected. Rookie mistake. There, I found the emails poorly hidden, poorly written, filled with flirtations and arrangements, late lunches, hotel receipts, inside jokes, the kind of intimacy we hadn't shared in months. He wasn't even careful. He didn't think he had to be. And why would he? Claire had no past, no edge, no bite. But the truth was, I wasn't always Claire. Before the ribbon, before the vineyard wedding and the soft voice and the storybook marriage, I was someone else. Someone he never met. Someone he would have never dared to cross. I closed the laptop and smiled. Because now, the game had begun. And I was done playing fair, where rain fell like a whisper that Friday afternoon, tapping soft rhythms against the windshield as I followed Richard's car down narrow, unfamiliar streets. The sky was an unbroken sheet of gray, the kind that blurred the edges of reality and made everything feel slightly off. He thought he was clever. Thought I wouldn't notice the way he shaved more carefully that morning, or how he wore cologne when all he said he was doing was grabbing a quick lunch with Greg from work. I knew Greg. Greg was balding, vegan, and currently vacationing in Thailand with his husband. So I followed him. He didn't even bother to check the mirror as he drove, humming along to the radio like he hadn't been living two lives. The neighborhood was unfamiliar. Not dangerous, but not quite cozy either. Rows of aging apartment buildings stood side by side like tombstones, each with peeling paint and flickering porch lights. He pulled into a gravel lot behind a beige building with ivy strangling its bricks. No cameras, no watchful neighbors, just broken blinds and the smell of mildew. I parked half a block away, slipping on my sunglasses despite the gloom. From a distance, I watched him step out of the car. He straightened his coat, smoothed his hair in the side mirror, and checked his breath. The nerves of a man about to step into fantasy. Then he disappeared inside. Oh no. I waited exactly 11 minutes. Long enough for the elevator to creak its way up. Long enough for the heat of his body to leave the stairwell. Then I followed. The lobby of the building smelled like wet carpet and desperation. The mailbox for 6B had a glittery pink heart sticker on it. Lexi, written in bubbly cursive on a strip of masking tape. Of course. The elevator groaned with age as it lifted me floor by floor, each lurch accompanied by a buzz like an irritated wasp. My reflection in the metal doors looked too calm. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. I simply stood at the end of the hallway, far enough to be hidden in the shadows, close enough to listen. The walls were thin. I heard laughter. High-pitched, breathy hers. Then his voice, low, familiar, soaked in that easy charm he once used on me. I could make out words here and there. Missed you. Can't stay too long. She's suspicious lately. A drawer opened. A kiss was audible. Lips and teeth and muffled pleasure. Something twisted inside me, but it wasn't pain. It was memory. Old and rusted, scraping against the walls of my ribs like claws. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I did what I had always done best. I memorized. The sound of her laugh. The rhythm of his voice when he lied. The soft sigh he made when he sank into someone who wasn't me. The hallway light flickered above me, buzzing like a dying fly. And then she saw me. Lexi. Just a glimpse. A flutter of her face at the peephole. I had stepped too close to the door without realizing, drawn forward by the hunger to see. For a split second, her eye met mine through the tiny glass lens, and that was all it took. She gasped. Footsteps rushed inside. Whispers. Something like panic. The chain lock sliding. But Richard didn't come out. I didn't move. I wanted her to wonder, to question what she'd seen. A woman in the hallway, a face too pale, eyes too still, a ribbon in her hair, soaked by rain that hadn't touched her. When the elevator arrived again, I stepped inside slowly and smiled at the reflection. Not Claire, not really. Back in the car, I watched the building from my side mirror. 10 minutes passed. 15. Finally, he emerged. He looked over his shoulder, as if expecting someone, as if something inside had unsettled him. His shirt was wrinkled. His lips were swollen. He glanced up and down the street, then hurried to his car. He didn't see me drive away first. That night, as he slept beside me exhausted from the weight of his double life, I stared at the ceiling and thought about Lexi. Not in anger, in fascination. Who was she? What did she believe about him? Did she think he was single? Did she think he loved her? Did she see me, even for that brief second, not as a jealous wife, but as a warning? The next day, I left something on our bed for him to find. A pair of earrings. Not mine, not Claire's. Cheap, plastic, pink. I tucked them just beneath his pillow and left the sheets slightly turned. He would find them. He would hesitate, maybe even panic. But he wouldn't confront me. He couldn't. Because if he asked where they came from, he would admit to the crime. And Richard was a coward before he was anything else. Later that evening, he looked tired. He rubbed his eyes, stared at his phone like it betrayed him. I asked him sweetly if he was okay. He smiled. Just tired, babe. Work's been rough. Lie. Maybe take a day off, I suggested, brushing my hand through his hair. He nodded, distracted, already unraveling. That night he tossed in his sleep, mumbled, names, words I didn't recognize. One name stuck, Lena. Not Lexi, Lena. Another one. I sat by the window, red ribbon loose in my hand, and wondered just how many of us there had been. And how many more it would take before he began to remember something beyond the pleasure. Something colder. Something buried in him since the beginning. Before I was Claire, I was no one. Not in the poetic sense, not the fragile, I was lost until I found love cliché. No, I mean that literally. Claire was a mask, one of many. And Richard never questioned it. He didn't want to. He fell in love with the idea of someone who needed him. Someone soft. Someone sculpted to fit the shape of his expectations. Men like him rarely see beyond what they want. And I knew exactly what kind of woman he wanted. I had become her before, many times, for many men. My past lives weren't written in journals or saved in albums. They existed only in fragments, burned letters, scorched velvet gloves, old teeth in black velvet boxes. I didn't keep them as memories. I kept them as warnings. I remember being Annabelle Kerrigan once. I was 14 the first time I changed my name. 14 and bloodied, shaking in the woods outside the house that burned down behind me. The screams of my parents were already gone, eaten by fire and rage. The house, a place of darkness and spells, was nothing but ash by dawn. My mother called herself a hedge witch. She spoke to birds and bled into the earth. My father was less magical and far more monstrous. He taught me what betrayal looked like, long before boys ever kissed me. And on the night I made my first pact, not with a devil, but with something older, I became something else. Not a witch. Not exactly. Not a ghost. But close. From then on, I wore lives like clothing. I studied the way people moved, how they spoke, what they craved. I gave them what they desired, and in return, I took what they didn't even know they were giving. Their time, their trust, their secrets. And if they broke me, if they lied, or used or discarded me like something cheap, I left them hollow. Confused, haunted. Not always dead, but never whole. Richard was different only in the way a snake's scales might glimmer in prettier colors. Still venom beneath. He never asked who I used to be. He never wondered why there were no childhood photos, why my family never visited, why my passport had been issued only a few years ago. He believed what I showed him. Soft Claire with the pretty handwriting and a traumatic backstory vague enough to sound true. My parents died in a car crash, I told him, eyes glistening. I don't talk about it much. That was enough for him. It gave him a little mystery to cling to and a little distance he wouldn't dare cross. But there were clues, always, like the humming. Sometimes I'd hum while doing the dishes, songs no one knew, folk tunes in languages long forgotten. Richard never asked, just said, "That's pretty," and walked on. Or the mirror. There's one in our hallway, antique, with tarnished corners. I bought it secondhand, though the seller had looked pale when wrapping it. said it gave her nightmares. I smiled and paid in cash. That mirror reflects more than faces. Sometimes in the corner of your eye, it shows something else. A flicker of movement. A girl who isn't you. A room that doesn't match the one you're standing in. Richard avoided it after a while, said it made him dizzy. He didn't know what he was seeing. He didn't know who he was seeing. Once I caught him staring at it too long. He blinked, shook his head, and said, "For a second, I thought I saw someone else behind me." I smiled. "You probably did." He laughed nervously. "I didn't." It was around this time that Lexi stopped replying to his texts. He'd check his phone constantly, hiding the screen from me even though I never asked. He'd go into the other room to make calls and come back looking frustrated. One night I heard him leave a voicemail, voice trembling in a way I hadn't heard since our wedding. "Lex, I don't know what happened. Did I say something? Please call me back. This isn't like you." He stood outside our bedroom door for 5 minutes after that. Silent, as if waiting for something to answer, but nothing did. I watched through the mirror. Not the one on the wall, the other one. The one I kept hidden behind a painting in my closet. An heirloom, sort of, more like a relic. It showed me things. Lexi lying in bed, eyes wide, covers pulled up to her throat. A figure standing in the corner of her room. Not me, not quite, but part of me. She was already unraveling. The part of me that haunted her was subtle. It whispered her name when she turned on the faucet. Moved objects when her back was turned. Showed her faces in window panes that blinked when she looked away. Richard didn't believe her, of course. The last message she sent him simply read, "You never told me about your wife, or that she's not right." He deleted it, but not before I saw it. One evening, I left a box on Richard's desk. It was small, wrapped in blue paper, his favorite color. Inside, a necklace, tarnished, old, not mine, and a note in cursive he didn't recognize. "She's wearing your name like a mask. Do you even know who she is?" He didn't mention it. He locked it away in his drawer. But I found him staring at it days later, long after he thought I'd gone to bed. He was starting to suspect. But not the truth. Not that Claire was just a skin stitched over something much, much older. He thought I was having a breakdown. That made me laugh. Because the truth was, I'd never been more whole. The best part about revenge isn't the final blow, it's the quiet orchestration before it, the whispers behind doors, the unease you feed like a steady drip of poison. Revenge isn't loud, it doesn't scream. It breathes. It lingers. It rehearses. And Richard, my dear, began to feel it in ways he couldn't name. It started with small things, barely there shifts in our daily routine. One evening, he opened his drawer to find all of his socks mismatched, every pair swapped into strange combinations of patterns he never owned. He asked me about it. "I thought you liked quirky things," I smiled. He laughed, but not easily. The next day, his car keys were missing. We searched for hours, turning the house upside down. Eventually, I found them beneath the bathroom sink, inside a Ziploc bag, submerged in mouthwash. "I must be losing my mind," he muttered. I said nothing, just handed him a towel. Lexi was gone, vanished without ceremony. No texts, no calls. Her number disconnected. I had left her something. A final gift. A single photograph, slipped under her apartment door. One she never remembered taking. It was her, sleeping. Peacefully. And beside her, standing at the edge of her bed, a woman with a red ribbon in her hair. Blurry, pale, watching. I didn't need to scare her out of town. I needed her gone. Richard never found out what happened to her. One day she was his escape, and the next, she was a ghost. He asked around, drove past her building. The landlord told him 6B had been empty for a week, that the girl who lived there left in the middle of the night. No note, no notice, just packed up and disappeared. He didn't know that I had been to apartment 6B the night before she left. He didn't know what I whispered into her ear while she lay frozen in sleep, eyes wide but body paralyzed, stuck between consciousness and terror. He didn't hear me say, "You were never his first." I began leaving fragments for him. First, a receipt, one tucked neatly into his wallet, a hotel in another state, dated 3 months before we were married. A single night, a king suite, 2 guests. He stared at it for a long time. "I don't remember this," he finally said. "You must have been drunk," I replied, folding laundry. Then came the journal. An old battered thing, leather-bound with yellowed pages and handwriting that didn't match mine. I placed it on his desk, bookmarked at a random page. "I saw him again today. He told me he loved me, but he still wears the ring she gave him. He says he'll leave her soon. I don't believe him anymore. He didn't ask me about it, but I saw him reading more the next night, and the next, always alone, always quiet. Sometimes I'd hear him whispering to himself, 'Who wrote this?' The dreams followed. He began waking up at odd hours, panting, sweating. One night I opened my eyes and found him sitting upright, staring at me. 'Claire?' I smiled. 'Yes?' He didn't respond. His hand trembled when he reached for the lamp. You look different for a moment,' he said. 'Different how?' 'I don't know. Like your face shifted. It's stupid.' I leaned forward, brushing a finger along his cheek. 'Maybe it's the dreams.' His eyes didn't meet mine. 'They're getting worse.' I already knew. He dreamed of mirrors, of hallways with no end, of women faceless, eyeless, calling his name from behind walls. Sometimes he woke crying. Sometimes he didn't wake at all. I invited his friend Greg over for dinner one night, the same Greg he'd once claimed to be having lunch with when he was really tangled in another woman's sheets. Greg was harmless, chatty, a little too fond of red wine. "I've never seen Rich so pale," he said, chuckling after his third glass. "You all right, man?" Richard forced a smile. "Just not sleeping well lately." "Still seeing ghosts?" Greg teased, nudging him. Richard's expression froze. Greg laughed, oblivious. "He used to say that in college, you know? Said our dorm had a ghost that watched him sleep. Creeped all of us out." That detail was new to me, and it made something inside me stir. Later that night, I asked Richard about it. "I don't remember that," he said. "But it happened?" Greg exaggerates. "I probably just had a nightmare once." I leaned in close and whispered, "What if it wasn't a nightmare?" He didn't answer. In the final rehearsal, I wore the red ribbon again. He hadn't seen it in months. I found it on our wedding night table, crumpled, frayed, tucked behind a lamp like he couldn't bring himself to throw it out, but didn't want to see it either. When he walked in and saw it in my hair, he flinched. "What's wrong?" I asked sweetly. "Nothing. You just surprised me. You used to say it was your favorite." "I don't remember saying that." "Lie." I served dinner. Candlelight flickered. Soft music played a piano version of La Vie en Rose, our song, the one I pretended to love when we danced in that vineyard beneath blood-colored leaves. He didn't eat much. He kept looking at the mirror behind me. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just tired." He glanced again. The reflection wasn't matching. It smiled when I didn't. It blinked slower. Its eyes were black for a moment too long. He pushed his chair back suddenly, knocked over his wine. I need to lie down," he muttered. I nodded. "Of course." I cleaned the glass slowly, quietly. I could feel him staring at me from the hallway. He was beginning to realize, but not what I was. Not yet. He still thought this was guilt, that the cheating was catching up to him, that maybe some part of his conscience was finally crawling up from the basement of his soul to whisper, "You're not a good man." But I wasn't guilt. I was memory. I was the shape he'd seen in his dreams since college, in shadows, in closets, in the back of his mind when he looked too long into a mirror. I'd been rehearsing this for years, and now the curtain was about to rise. Richard had come home later than usual. He claimed he got caught in traffic, but I already knew where he'd been. Not with another woman, not anymore. He hadn't had the energy for infidelity lately. Something was chewing at him from the inside, stealing his appetite for pleasure. He looked thinner, hollow-eyed, like the dream of who he was had been fading, and even he could feel it slipping through his fingers. I cooked his favorite meal anyway: garlic butter salmon, roasted rosemary potatoes, steamed vegetables. The same meal I'd made the night he proposed. Back then, he'd smiled through every bite, lifted me into his arms in the kitchen, whispered how perfect I was. Tonight, he barely touched his plate. "You didn't eat much," I said. "I'm not hungry." His voice was dry, like it came from deep inside a well. "Are you sleeping?" I asked. He shook his head. "I keep hearing things. In the house, at night." I set my fork down and tilted my head gently. "Like what?" "I don't know. A woman's voice, whispers, sometimes crying. Once I thought I heard someone humming." I smiled faintly. "That's strange." His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his glass. "Claire," he said suddenly, looking at me sharply. "You look different tonight." "Different how?" He didn't answer right away. "You look like someone else. Just for a second. It's probably just my eyes, or the light." "It could be," I said softly. I stood and walked to his side of the table, slowly, carefully. The air felt heavier with each step. He watched me like he was watching something rise out of water, something familiar wearing a stranger's face. I leaned down and brushed his hair back with my fingers. "You're tired," I whispered. "You're seeing things." He nodded, though his eyes didn't leave mine. I think something's wrong with me," he confessed, voice cracking. "I don't feel like myself." I crouched beside him, rested my head on his knee like a devoted wife. The ribbon in my hair brushed his arm. "I know," I said. Then I looked up and let the mask slip. Just a little. Just enough. I let the stillness bleed out from my bones, let the shimmer of something ancient glint in my gaze. My pupils dilated into black. My smile held just a little too long. I tilted my head in the way corpses do when they don't quite understand they're dead. He inhaled sharply, eyes wide. His chair screeched back against the hardwood as he stumbled to his feet. "What the hell?" he muttered. "Claire!" But I was already standing, already smoothing my apron, already perfect again. "Yes?" He blinked hard. "Nothing. I thought, never mind." He backed away slowly, not out of reason, out of instinct. Good. He was beginning to feel it now, the slow crawl of dread. That night he didn't come to bed. I listened to his footsteps, pacing the living room. I heard the faint flick of a lighter, the cigarette habit he'd abandoned years ago. He was shaking, whispering to himself. I smiled in the dark. We were almost there. In the morning he asked, "Have I ever hurt you?" The question caught me off guard, not because it surprised me, but because it was the first honest thing he'd said in weeks. I stirred my tea, calm and quiet. "In what way?" "Ever?" "I don't know. Lied to you, broke your trust, made you feel less." I met his gaze. "You tell me." He stared at me for a long time. Then he left for work without another word. That evening, I set the final piece. A photograph, old, faded, tucked into the pocket of his coat. A woman with long black hair, standing at the edge of a cliff. Wind in her face, eyes hollow. In the background, barely visible, was a man. His face was Richard's, but he had no memory of the place, no memory of the woman. Still, he brought the photo inside like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He sat on the edge of the bed, running his thumb over the glossy surface. "She looks like you," he whispered. I said nothing. He looked up, eyes searching my face. "Where did this come from?" I tilted my head, mirroring the photo's angle. "Does it matter?" That night, I woke to him standing beside the bed, just staring down at me. I didn't move. His eyes were glassy, distant. "Claire," he murmured, "what are you?" 1,000 answers stirred inside me. None of them were his to hear. I smiled. He stepped back as though I had struck him. "You're not her anymore," he whispered. "You're not Claire." I sat up slowly. "I was never Claire," I said. After that, he began to avoid mirrors entirely. I caught him covering the hallway one with a bedsheet, taped cardboard over the bathroom one. He claimed that they were reflecting things wrong, said they made his face look twisted, like it was stretched too wide, or not his at all. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating. His coworkers stopped seeing him. One afternoon I called his phone. He didn't answer. I found him in the garage, door open, engine cold, just sitting behind the wheel in silence. I stood beside the car. "Going somewhere?" He turned, eyes sunken, hands shaking on the steering wheel. "I don't know what's real anymore," he said. "Sometimes I think I see someone else, wearing your skin, smiling when you're not, whispering things I can't understand." I crouched to his eye level and pressed my hand to the window. "Maybe you're just dreaming," I whispered. "Maybe this is all a dream." His tears came then. But dreams don't weep, and neither do I. It appeared on a Wednesday. Richard had taken to pacing the house during the day, wandering from room to room like a ghost in his own skin. He no longer went to work. He told his manager he needed time off for a personal emergency. That was his polite way of describing the slow collapse of his sanity. I pretended not to notice. Pretended not to hear him muttering to himself in the laundry room. Pretended I didn't know that he had started leaving notes around the house, scraps of paper with phrases like, "Is this still my house? Don't trust the mirrors." Who was I before her? Then came the door. It hadn't been there before. Behind the tall bookshelf in the study, the one he rarely touched. One morning, I moved it ever so slightly to vacuum behind it. That's what I told him. What he found behind it wasn't a wall, but a narrow wooden door with a tarnished brass handle. No keyhole, no lock. Just the kind of door that shouldn't be there. When he first saw it, he froze. Not out of curiosity, but out of recognition. His fingers hovered near the handle, trembling. "I don't remember this," he whispered. "You must have forgotten," I said gently. He turned to me pale. "Claire, this wasn't here before. This can't be here." "But it is." He didn't open it that day. Not yet. Instead, he sat in the study for hours, staring at the door as if it might blink or breathe or whisper his name. That night he asked me, "Did you build this house?" I laughed softly. "No, darling, you did." He blinked. "No," he muttered. "That's not right. I remember buying it with someone, but I don't remember who. I remember moving in, unpacking, but not the wedding, not the proposal. The faces keep changing. It's like a film reel with missing frames." I reached for his hand. "You're tired." He looked at me, then truly looked, and said something that left the air trembling. "You have too many faces." The next morning, the door was open. Just a crack. He looked at me, then truly looked, and said something that left the air trembling. "You have too many faces." The next morning, the door was open. Just a crack. Enough to see the darkness yawning behind it. Blacker than any basement should be. It wasn't a void. It was deeper than that. A kind of silence that pressed against your chest and made your thoughts scatter like mice in a floodlight. He stood before it in his robe, barefoot, not breathing. "I didn't open it," he said, voice empty. "But it's open," I said. He didn't go in right away. He waited. Hours passed. He sat in front of it like a dog guarding a crypt. Once I walked past and heard him whispering something low, in a voice that didn't sound like his own. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to forget. I didn't mean to leave you." I asked him who he was talking to. He looked up at me like he was waking from a coma. "No one," he said. "Just Someone I think I used to know. That night he had a dream. I know because I stood beside the bed, watching his eyelids flicker. He moaned softly, sweat pooling at his hairline. Then he screamed. He woke choking on nothing, gasping like hands were around his throat. I saw them, he rasped. Who? All of them. The women. The ones I don't remember their names. But they were there. They knew me. They hated me. He reached for my hand. I didn't move. They were whispering things. Names I've never said. Dates, places. They said I was a thief. That I took their faces. That I used them and forgot them. He paused. They said, you were the one who brought them back. I finally met his gaze. What do you think, Richard? Do you believe them? He opened his mouth, closed it again. Then, I don't know what to believe anymore. The next morning, he descended the stairs behind the door. He didn't tell me. He didn't need to. The house fell silent in a way that said too much. It was like the air held its breath. I found the bookshelf half shoved aside, the door wide open, the darkness yawning larger than before, alive with something unseen but watching. He had gone in alone. That was the first time I truly smiled in weeks. The stairs didn't lead to a basement. Not really. They twisted downward into impossible architecture, too long, too deep, as if he were being pulled beneath the skin of the world. The walls were smooth, damp, breathing, and on them were scratches. Dozens, hundreds, all made by fingernails, all spelling names. Some were clear: Lexi, Sarah, Catherine, Alyssa, Reese. Others were half erased, clawed over, desperate. He recognized none of them, but they all knew him. The stairs led to a room, stone-walled, circular, and at its center, a mirror, old, tall, with a frame that seemed carved from bone. It reflected nothing. Not him, not the room, just a void. But then it changed. The mirror flickered, and inside he saw something begin to form. A woman. Not Claire, not anyone he remembered, but a face he had seen before, in the corners of dreams, in fogged glass, in memories that didn't belong to him. She wore a red ribbon. She smiled and the glass cracked. Lines spidered across it like veins, and with each fracture, he saw more. More women, standing behind her, layered in the glass like film slides, distorted and blinking. Some wept, some screamed. Some smiled wide, mouths stretching too far, teeth sharp as razors. They all whispered in perfect, bone-chilling unison, "Do you know who she is?" Then the mirror shattered, and the door closed. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He simply stood in that empty place, surrounded by glass, breathing the dust of his own past, his sins finally giving him faces. He was trapped not in a basement, but in the memory of what he had done, of what he had always been. A man who used, who forgot, who stepped on broken women like floorboards and never noticed the sound of them splintering beneath him. Upstairs, I served dinner for one. I set his plate, folded his napkin, poured his wine. The seat across from me stayed empty. It would remain so, forever, because the house had taken him, and it remembered everything. It was quiet after he disappeared. Not just the kind of quiet that comes from an empty room. This was deeper. A hollowed-out silence that settled in the walls, soaked into the floorboards, lived inside the house like breath had been pulled from its lungs. Richard was gone. The door behind the bookshelf was gone too. No frame, no cracks in the wall, no sign it had ever been there. And yet I still heard footsteps. At night, when I turned off the lights, I'd hear pacing beneath the floorboards. Sometimes quick, sometimes slow, sometimes erratic, like a man stumbling in circles. It didn't scare me. They were his footsteps, his desperation, his punishment. What scared me, what truly made my skin prickle, was how familiar it all felt. Like I'd done this before. Like I'd buried someone again. I returned to the mirror in the hidden closet, the one behind the painting. Its surface was cool to the touch. It didn't show my reflection anymore. Not exactly. Now, when I stood before it, I saw them, the others. Not in full, just flashes, expressions, hands pressed against invisible glass. Some angry, some pleading, some smiling, almost grateful. I traced a fingertip along the lower edge of the frame. "Do you remember him?" I whispered. A face flickered in the mirror. "Lexi." She nodded once. Behind her, more appeared, layered like wet photographs. Sarah, Reese, Catherine. Women he thought had forgotten him. Women he left behind, discarded like receipts from rooms he shouldn't have been in. They had all ended differently: heartbreak, breakdown, near death. But one thing they shared, he remembered none of them. And they remembered everything. In the following days, I began restoring the house. It had become infected by his presence, by his scent, his habits, his rot. I cleaned out the closet full of his ties and monogrammed shirts, donated his shaving kits, sold his watch, threw out the cologne he bought after cheating on me for the third time. I repainted the bedroom, something brighter, airier. People in town assumed he left me. "They always do," I said to the woman at the pharmacy, who gave me a pitying glance when I picked up only one toothbrush instead of two. "Men like him aren't built for real love," she said, tapping her acrylic nails on the counter. "You're better off." I smiled. "Yes, I am." Still, the house held his fingerprints. Ghosts of him lingered in strange places. I found a post-it note on the inside of the freezer door. "Don't forget, anniversary next week, October 15th. He'd never remembered our anniversary once. I found another stuck inside a copy of Crime and Punishment. "She's watching, even in her sleep." He wasn't wrong. Sometimes I wandered the halls in the dark. Not sleepwalking, not dreaming. Just existing, as I truly was. And somewhere beneath the floorboards, he still moved. I could feel him. I could hear the soft drag of his fingers against the beams. I imagined him trying to claw his way out. Imagined him writing names in the dust, calling for a forgiveness that no longer existed. But there's no language left for mercy in the place he now lives. I opened the trunk at the back of the attic. Inside, mementos. Not Richard's. Mine. Before I became Claire, I was so many things. So many people. I kept their pieces. A white lace glove, singed at the wrist. A matchbox from a motel in Georgia. One man bled out in the bathtub there. A boarding school badge from England, stolen after another woman's accident. A photo of a girl with her mouth stitched shut. I think she might have been me. Once. And then there was the book, bound in leather, unlabeled, heavy. Its pages were filled with names, dates, men, the ones who never remembered, and the ones who tried. I added Richard's name at the bottom of the last page. Richard Marshall, June 2020, November 2025. Sins, lies, infidelity, forgetting. I closed the book. For now. 3 nights later, I dreamed of the basement again. Only this time I was inside it. It was darker than before. The glass shards from the shattered mirror had rearranged themselves along the walls, like embedded teeth. They pulsed. They whispered. I followed the sound of the voices, dozens, maybe hundreds, echoing in and out of sync. At the center of the space stood Richard. He was kneeling now, back to me, head bowed. His suit was torn, barefoot, blood on his hands. He kept digging at the stone floor with nothing but his fingernails. Digging graves, perhaps, or trying to find the man he used to be. He turned once, just enough for me to see his face. He had no eyes, only black pits empty, screaming silence. I didn't speak. I simply placed my red ribbon on the floor beside him. He reached for it, and I woke up smiling. A week later, a man approached me at the local bookstore. Kind eyes, smart clothes, Lonely Fingers. He asked what I was reading. I told him it was a mystery. He said he loved mysteries. Asked my name. I looked up at him, lips curling. Lena, I said. He smiled. That's a beautiful name. He didn't know, but he would, eventually. Because all men carry the seeds of their ruin. All it takes is the right face to make them forget what they've done and remember who they truly are. The house is still now, but not silent. It breathes. Not like lungs, but like earth. Like soil warming under a grave. The walls no longer echo with Richard's footsteps, but they remember. They hold memory like bone holds marrow quietly, deeply, unrelentingly. The floorboards no longer creak under his weight, but sometimes in the hours just before dawn, I hear them strain like something is moving underneath. Something that was once a man. The man who called himself Daniel had beautiful hands. That's the first thing I noticed when he brought me coffee. He smiled like he meant it. Said he was new in town. Said he found the bookstore cozy. Said he didn't want to be too forward, but I looked like someone he'd seen in a dream. I smiled. Dreams are always how it begins. That week we had lunch together. He told me he was divorced amicably, he said. A lie. I could smell the rot behind the grin. He asked what I did for work. I told him I was a freelance editor. Another skin, another name. He didn't know what I was. Not yet. But I was patient. Because now I understood the rhythm, the cycle, the craving. I returned to the mirror in the closet on the third night after meeting Daniel. The glass shimmered again. Not with reflections, but with memory. Lexi appeared first. Her hair was shorter now. She looked peaceful. Then came Reese. Her smile was softer than I remembered. Then the others, all the names that Richard never remembered. All the women who once lived in the shadow of charm. Their faces were clearer. Their pain had begun to uncoil, like frost melting from the edge of axe. They watched me, and I watched them. Is he still alive? I asked. The mirror didn't answer in words. Instead, it showed me the basement again. Not mine, not here. Daniel's. A different house, a different staircase, but the same feeling, that choking quiet, that rotten darkness, that sense of something watching just behind the walls. He had a door too, hidden, not by books, by guilt, and someday soon he would hear it open. I began the rituals again. Not spells, not incantations, nothing so childish. Just preparations. A photo slipped into his coat pocket of a woman he didn't recognize, staring at him from behind a foggy cafe window. A voicemail left on his phone from a number that didn't exist. I know what you did. I remember. His toothbrush moved half an inch every day, just enough to disturb, not enough to accuse. And once the scent of someone else's perfume on his pillow. He asked me if I'd been in his house. No, I said sweetly, but I had. Of course I had. I always find the door first, even when they don't know it exists. Daniel began to break by the second week. He looked tired, always checking windows, asking questions with hesitant smiles. You ever feel like someone's watching you? He asked one night as we sat in his living room. Yes, I replied. He blinked. Yeah? How do you deal with it? I don't mind it, I said. Some things should be watched. He didn't answer. One night I asked him a question I already knew the answer to. Why did your marriage end? He swallowed slowly. It just didn't work out. Lie. Did you love her? A pause. I did, I think. Maybe. I leaned closer, watched his throat twitch. Did you hurt her? His breath hitched. He didn't answer. And that was enough. That night, his mirror cracked. He sent me a photo of it the next morning, confused and shaken. I woke up and it was like this, he wrote. No one else was in the house. Weird, right? I told him it was probably the humidity, but I knew better. The cracks weren't from stress. They were from memory. Something inside him was starting to wake up, or crawl back in. He couldn't outrun it anymore. They never can. I visited Richard one last time, not physically, not in the flesh, but below, beneath, through the mirror. He was there still digging, still whispering, still wearing the hollowed out mask of a man who couldn't forget anymore. He looked up when I arrived, his eyes black as burnt wood softened. "You came back," he rasped. "No," I whispered. "You never left." He lowered his head again. Dig, dig, dig. It was no longer punishment. It was confession. Each handful of dirt, a secret. Each breath, a sin. He would dig until the end of time, and when his hands turned to bone and his voice to dust, his memory would remain. Because that's what I am. Not vengeance, not death, memory. And memory never dies. Daniel will go next. He already hears footsteps on the stairs that don't exist. Already wonders if his lights flicker because of wiring, or someone watching from the dark. He dreams of a woman with no face. Sometimes she's standing in the corner. Sometimes she's laying in his bed. Always she is smiling. I'm patient. I'm always patient. Because there will always be another Richard, another Daniel, another man who builds love like a cage and forgets the women he locks inside it. But they forget something vital. The cage has a door. And one day, the door opens back. You don't know who I am, but you will. Sooner or later. Because the ribbon is red, the mirror is waiting. And I always remember,